You're listening to Life Conversations with Senior Helpers, where expert advice and real-life experiences offer support for every step of the aging journey. Because aging isn't just a stage of life, it's a conversation worth having.
Hi, and welcome to Life Conversations. I am Christina Chartrand, and
I'm David Chandler.
we are so excited to have you here today. And we are discussing with my friend Bob Nations a brand new book that he has put out. It's Navigating the Art of Aging. Well, we're so glad to have you and to talk about this wonderful book that I keep thinking of more and more people that I want for them to read it. It's a fantastic kind of timeline of the time that you've been with Senior Helpers and really sharing some of your wonderful stories with your clients and just how you've impacted so many people in your community. And I really have enjoyed this and enjoy sharing it with so many people. And so today we're really excited to be able to talk to our listeners today, allow them to learn a little bit more about this book and some of your personal experiences, Bob. I think they're they come from the heart and but also really good lessons to learn.
Bob, and I like to tell people when I think about this book, uh, from having a background in medical care, we would always say all these crazy stories that happen, and we'd get together and we'd share stories and be like, this is so crazy, all the amazing things, sad things, scary things that have happened. We could easily get together and write a book. And you did it. Everybody kind of says, we should write a book about these things one day. And Bob, how long have you been with Senior Helpers?
17, just over 17 years.
It's over 17 years, and an amazing career before that with toys, right? For
Right. The
kids.
toy industry. Yeah. 30 years in the toy industry.
Taking
Yeah.
all of those stories and it's Christina and I, we were talking before the podcast today just about how some of these stories, they just stick with you, like you don't forget them. So but yeah, Bob, can you share a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start diving into the book?
Well, that was the idea of the book I came into this home care industry with no knowledge. And of course, I try to run into things. So I try to absorb as much knowledge as I came. And talk about learning on the job. That's kind of what happened to me is I learned on the job. And I kept telling these stories over time. And people would say to me, well, Bob, these are great stories. You should write a book. And I'm like, oh, no one's ever going to want to read something that I write in a book. But then I got to thinking about the stories and how I tell them to help other people. And I was like, well, maybe I should write them down and share them with people to try and help them in their journey of growing older, or their journey of helping a parent or a loved one go through the journey. So that was the whole logic of the book, was to share my journey, hoping to help other people in their journey as they grow older, or navigate the art of aging, as I call it.
Well, I've enjoyed so many of the different stories that you wrote, and that's what's nice about it. I love the way the book is set up, Bob, because you can read one story, you can put it down, and then you can pick it back up quickly and read another story, and it's really digestible. It's like because each one has its own little story and its own little takeaway from it. That's why. So for me, like if I had a minute or so, I'd sit, I'd read like a chapter of it, and then I'm like, okay, let me get back to work, and then I go back again and read another chapter of it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. I do want to preface just with some of our listeners, they may not realize. So David and I work for a company called Senior Helpers, and it's a home care business. And so we have Senior Helpers businesses all over the country. And Bob Nations is in the Napa Valley area, which of course that's quite fabulous just to be in Napa Valley, my favorite places ever. And that's where all these stories have come from. It's really come from growing his business and developing relationships with clients. And I always have to also say that Bob Nations is one of our top performers, which means when we think about all the different offices around the country, they do really, really well. And sometimes when you think about that, when you think about someone who owns a business, they're doing really well, they get very caught up. It's big, big business. And when after reading this book, you go actually and you say, I cannot believe the relationships that you created and the connections. And when I think of the reasons why you're a top performer, it is because of these relationships. It's because of the relationships with your communities and the families and your people who work for you, as well as the clients, that really has made you so successful. And that's kind of been my messaging I've been sharing with so many people, is that you can't step away and kind of just let it work like a machine. That we're in the people business, and you've really shown us what that means to be in the business of helping other people.
Well, that's a key. That's a key point, because that's what I tell people all the time. It's really about the people. If you make it about the people, then it's easy to do the business part, because it just comes to you. I mean, because you create such a positive atmosphere, and it's such a rewarding atmosphere, and you get caught up in it and get excited about it. It makes for an easy way to have a business, because it's so rewarding.
Yeah, yeah.
Bob, one of the things that I've heard you talk about is the name Senior Helpers. And you've talked about this before, like, what does that mean?
Well, that's the interesting part, was because when I bought into the franchise, I bought into it because I liked the name. It described who we were, right?
Yeah.
And so, as I've always taken on myself, and then also asked my staff and employees to do, is we help everybody, no matter what their call is about. So if someone calls, we either need to help them ourselves or find them a resource to help them in some regard. So I always made that my mission to do that. One of the first calls I got was a social worker that said, well, this lady needs to move. Can you help her move? And I'm like, well, of course I can. Had nothing to do with caregiving, but I actually vetted out a mover and actually went and introduced, just like we do with caregivers, went and introduced the mover to the lady and walked through the whole process with this woman and helped her move. I didn't actually help her move physically, but I helped her move in finding her a great source. So that was one of the first calls that I got when I started out.
I love that.
Yeah.
So why don't you share one of your stories? Why don't you share just some of your favorites? I'd love our listeners to hear a couple of them.
Well, one of the first stories is in the book. I call him Dr. J, and I made it so generic so people didn't know specifically who the individual was. And Dr. J came to me, and I very distinctly remember just before Mother's Day in my first year. And he was a retired anesthesiologist. He was near 90 years old. His daughter called and said, our dad needs help in his home. So we started with him in his home. And the reason I remember Mother's Day is because, just as I did a lot, is I didn't have a caregiver to be with him on Mother's Day. And I had to tell my wife, I'm sorry that I'm going to have to go and take care of him. So I went, and he had a recliner and his bed. And I went and sat with him through the night. And through the night, he kept waking me up to help him go to the bathroom. And he really didn't need the help. I mean, that was the part that was, and I think this is why the family wanted somebody to help them, because he was really high maintenance, and he was very ego driven. He was an anesthesiologist. He was the chief of anesthesiology for this particular hospital. And so through that night, ironically, he and I bonded, and I started becoming more and more involved in his life, to the extent his children became no involvement whatsoever. And I became his surrogate son, as I call it. And I helped manage his world. And keep in mind, this is a multi-million-dollar man. He owned acres and acres of vineyards, and was a very successful man. But his ego was such when he was raising his children, or I think probably when his wife was raising his children, that he alienated them and they wanted nothing to do with him. So I took over. And one of the first challenges that I had with him is that, because number one, he was grumpy all the time. He would call me and say, "Hey, just come over and bring a shotgun. I want to end it all." And of course, I wasn't going to do that, but I would go sit down and try and analyze what was going on. And it finally dawned on me one day what was going on is he wasn't happy because he didn't have any life anymore. He was sitting around his house all the time doing nothing, and he was used to being playing golf or helping patients or whatever the case may be. And I finally realized that what I needed to do to get him to a better place was engage with him on a different level. So one of the things that I learned about him was he loved to go out to dinner. So I started picking him up and we started going out to dinner. And the good news is because he had a really high profile taste, I got to go to some of the finest restaurants in our community, which was really great. And then I learned that his wife, who had also been a physician, had a medical assistant that was around his age, and they had bonded and had spent time going to dinners together. So then I would go pick her up because she was ambulatory, and then I would go pick him up, and the three of us would go to dinner, and we would visit, and I'd get to know them a little bit better. But the key thing was they got to spend time together, and it increased his quality of life. So those opportunities went away from him on having to call me and say, hey, I want to end it all, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the reason I talk about this story today is because toward the end of his life, he actually had a blocked bladder, and we had taken him to the ER, and the ER doctor told me and him, because I was there by his bedside, and told us that if he didn't have surgery, he wouldn't be around much longer because there was nothing they could do with the blockage other than a surgical procedure. And at the time, he said, "Yes, I want to do it." And so we went about scheduling his surgery, and I hadn't gone to the hospital the day of his surgery, but I was nearby, and the surgeon actually called me from the prep room and said, hey, I've got a problem. He's refusing the surgery. And I said, what, has he given you a reason why? And he said, no, he just says he doesn't want to do it anymore. So I went to the hospital and sat again by his bedside and said, what's going on? He says, I've decided I've done enough in my life, and I want to be done with it, and I don't want to go through this. So I said, okay. And I looked at the surgeon. I said, I'm sorry you prepared all this, but we're going to take him home. We're going to put him on hospice. And by the way, I do this all knowing he's got 5 adult children, but it's all about me and my relationship with him. So again, bring him home, get him on hospice, and in about a week he passes away because you can't survive very long with blocked bladder and intestines. But the long and the short of it, he chose, and he and I had a relationship such that I could help support him in his decisions and make the arrangements, get all the things in order for him to do that. And then finally, when we got him home, got him on hospice, then I called his family and said, hey, this is what's going on. And they included me all through the process of once he passed away and planning his memorial service. And, I was like one of their family members. And it was quite a special moment given this man's, his career and his magnitude and who he was, that I got to be that close to him, and he trusted me that much to be a confidant.
And Bob, my gosh, when I hear that story, I'm thinking, here he is, like, I wasn't sure if he was in his room or like on the operating table, like they're getting ready to put him under anesthesia. But I was waiting to hear. Well, I came and talked to him, and I convinced him to go ahead and go through the surgery. And here you came as an understanding person, caring enough about him to respect his wishes and to say, you know what, if this is what you want, I'm here. I'm going to be your guide. I'm going to be here to support you. And you cared about him enough to respect those wishes. And, I think that that's kind of a turn in the story, that it's like, no, ultimately you cared so much about him that you wanted to give him that choice in his life, and you respected that.
That comes to my next story too, because my next story is kind of an opposite though, because my next story has to do with a gentleman that had moved to Napa and had moved here with his mother. I gather he never got married, never really had a relationship outside of his family, and he and his mother had moved to Napa to be closer to his sister, and his sister had fallen ill. And so they were moving here. And I say moving here, they were from the Bay Area, but they lived about an hour and a half away, 2 hours away. So being here closer was more convenient. So they move into this little nice, humble little flat, if you will. And the sister passes away. And the mom, being older, passes away shortly thereafter. And he is left in a community where he has no connection. He doesn't have any friends. He's not a churchgoer. He doesn't have any social connections. And how I came into his life is he called me because he saw an advertisement, Senior Helpers again. And he calls me and says, "Hey, you're Senior Helpers. Can you help me with the fact that my doctor's taken my driver's license away and I have no way of getting around?" Because he had no friends. And so I said, "Of course." And so I sat down and we put together a plan. And, for weeks he would call me and say, "Hey, I need to go to the barber shop, or I need to go grocery shopping." And as time went on, he started needing more and more care. But I had learned enough about him that he didn't have a lot of money. So expanding his care hours was going to be a challenge, except for the fact that I learned that he had been in the Navy. And so this was my first venture into a program from the Veterans Administration called Aid in Attendance. So I worked diligently to sit with him and get his paperwork done. And then we have this great service here in Napa County and most of the counties in California called the Veteran Service Officer. And I took the paperwork into him and we filed the paperwork for Mr. V and got it all settled. And so life went on. Well, fast forward a year, and because back then aid attendance took almost a year. Christina, you'll remember it used to take a long time. Now it's about 30 to 60 days, but used to take almost a year. And then about a year goes by, and our life is, we're continuing. I'm continuing to assist him, and he calls me one day, and I could tell something was wrong. And he's like, "You've got to come over here right away." And I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "Just come over here." So I get over there, and he answers the door like he normally did, and he goes, "Oh my God!" And he had a lot, tears in his eyes. And I go, "What is going on? What's happening?" He goes, "You won't believe it. Well, look what I got in the mail today." And he opens up this check, if you will, because it was a check from the Veterans Administration, $30,000 that he'd received in retroactive benefit from the time that we had applied. And he had never received anything close to that kind of money at one time in his entire life. And he was ecstatic. And he, of course, said that he couldn't have ever got there without me. And so again, so we bonded over that. As time goes on, of course, we continue to increase our care with him to the extent that I was just telling this story the other day is I had to go away. I didn't have to go away. I was going away to Christmas. I grew up in Texas, and here I'm in California, and my family and I are going to Texas. Well, I was so concerned about where he was health-wise that I actually went out and made arrangements with one of my assisted living community partners to do respite for a week. So I had to go to him and sell him on the idea that I needed him to move into this assisted living for a week while I was gone. And I pitched it to him as he was going on a resort vacation for the first time in his life. So we get him moved into his apartment in the assisted living. Of course, he was all panicky that I was moving him in there permanently. And I reassured him that wasn't the case. It was just for a week. So I go off on vacation, felt good about the fact he was taken care of. And then, of course, when I come back, we move back into the apartment. So as we move forward in our relationship, eventually he and I go to the doctor one day, and the doctor tells him and I that he has cancer, and that unfortunately it's a stage of cancer that he's not going to survive, and there's really no treatment process for it. So I remember him and I sitting and trying to determine what we should be doing next, and of course we decided that the idea would be to put him on hospice as time went on, so that we could help kind of manage him through the pain and the process he was going to experience. And he said, "The only thing that I want, Bob, is I want to die next to my piano." Because the one thing I haven't shared with you is Mr. V was an art teacher and also a music teacher. He taught piano, and in his living room, as small as it was, he had a baby grand piano in the living room. And all he wanted to do was make sure he was with his piano when he passed. So I said, "I'm taking care of it." So when I arranged for the hospice organization to come in, and what they do is they come in and they bring in a hospital bed, that hospital bed went directly right next to his piano. And as time went on, that's where he spent his time. And I'll never forget the one day I went to his house to visit him, and he was asleep, but he looked like maybe he had passed because he was very pale and very still. And I just sat there holding his hand, crying. I can't believe I still can't tell this story without choking up. Anyway, so he opens his eyes and he looks at me all bewildered. Why are you crying? Why are you crying? I said, "Well, because I'm sad that you're going to be leaving me, and I just it makes me really sad." He goes, "Well, I'm not leaving yet, and I can't believe no one's ever cried for me before, and it made me cry more." Of course, so we both kind of cried together a little bit, and I don't remember how long he lasted after that, but eventually he passes away, but I felt really good about the fact that, number one, I was there for him, got him money through the VA, helped him through the process. And again, food's a big deal. So we would go out to lunches. And so the very first time he'd ever been to In-N-Out was with me. And it was quite an experience watching his expression as he's eating one of those In-N-Out cheeseburgers. It was quite a fun experience. So I'll stop for a second because I can go on and on with my stories if you want to ask questions. So
They're the best. Oh, I just have to put a shout out for In-N-Out burgers.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of our life conversation with Bob Nations. We hope you enjoyed the insights and stories shared today. Be sure to tune back for part 2, where we'll continue exploring more of Bob's experiences and valuable advice. See you then. This has been Life Conversations with Senior Helpers. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the show, leave us a positive review on your favorite streaming platform, and share it with someone who may benefit. It helps us grow and helps us continue sharing expert guidance and real support for aging well. To learn more about Senior Helpers and how we help older adults live independently and safely at home, visit seniorhelpers.com.